So let's begin by watching this animation here, which is taken from the Ramayana. So we can see Lord Rama's monkey army building a bridge for him so that he can go to Lanka and save his wife. Look at how the monkey is saying hi to you. So these stories started coming 3000 years ago during the Vedic age. So let's learn more about it. You see, today we have our textbooks and notebooks, and we get to learn everything about knowledge from going to schools. But how did students 3000 years ago in India learn about these things? Well, because of that, we have the Vedas. Vedas in Sanskrit mean wisdom or knowledge, which come from Vid, which means to know. And this knowledge was brought to us by the Aryans. So all of this happened during the Vedic period. So the composition of Vedas is so important that that entire period was called the Vedic period, which existed from 1500 BCE till 600 BCE. This further has been divided into two parts, about which we will learn later. So how did these compositions come into existence? Well, you see, the Aryan sages or rishis, while meditating, used to look for God all around them. So what happened next? That the divine messages started coming to these sages or rishis while they were meditating, and they were able to compose this and turn them into the Vedas. Now, because they were having so much knowledge and information, they were also considered important during that time. So, as we have our textbooks and notebooks today, do you think 3000 years ago people had those? Take a look at this picture. Do you see even a single textbook or copy? Well, no. In fact, the Vedas were not passed down by writing, but in another manner. You see, the teacher will learn everything about the Veda by hearing about it or listening about it, and then he will pass it down to his students. So we get to see that the Vedas were not written. So they were not written because simply writing did not exist back then, right? So they were not written down, but they were passed on. How? Well, they were passed on from one generation to the other orally, by the word of mouth, so without writing. And hence, because this happened, they are referred to as Shruti literature. Shruti means that which is heard. So because the Vedas were heard and then passed down, it came to be known as Shruti literature. So let's learn more about this. Now, so Shruti literature, as we've already found out, means that which is heard. And most of it was composed during the early Vedic period, right? But there is another type of literature, that is Smriti literature. So what is the big difference between Shruti literature and Smriti literature? Well, the thing is that Smriti means that which is remembered. Now, this came later on, right? Why did this come later? Well, because Smriti literature was passed down by writing and not through the word of mouth, or not because of listening and then passing it on orally. So that is the big difference between Shruti literature and Smriti literature. Shruti literature was passed down orally, meanwhile Smriti literature was passed down by writing it down. So most of the Smriti literature was composed during this later Vedic period. So now let's focus on the early Vedic age. Firstly, how do we know so much about the early Vedic age? Well, this is because the Rigveda was composed during the early Vedic age, which was from 1500 BCE to 1000 BCE. And so it was so important, the Rigveda was so important that this entire early Vedic period is also known as the Rigvedic period. But during the later Vedic period, also parts of Vedas came, and these were Samaveda, Yajurveda and Atharva Veda, right? These came during the later Vedic period, which was there from 1000 BCE to 600 BCE. So take a look at these different manuscripts that are there on the screen. These are from the different Vedas, Samaveda, Yajurveda and Atharva Veda. So it is really important to understand that these manuscripts are from a much later time, as we already know that these Vedas were part of the Shruti literature, which, as we've already found out, were passed down orally and not by writing. So how do we get these? Well, these were made much later from that time. Now that we know that, can you tell me how many Vedas are there? 1, 2, 3 or 4? Well, the correct answer is there are 4 Vedas: Rigveda, Samaveda, Yajurveda and Atharva Veda. So now that we have learned so much about the Vedic literature, let's just recapitulate a little. So we have learned that there are 2 parts, right? One is Shruti literature and the next one is Spruti literature, about which we will learn on later. Shruti literature includes Veda Samhitas, which are then further divided into 4 Vedas: the Rigveda, which came during the early Vedic period, and then the Samaveda, Yajurveda and Atharva Veda. Now listen to this audio, which is of Gayatri Mantra.
Om Bhurbhuvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonah Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonah Prachodayat.
So did that calm you down? Well, you'd be fascinated to know that the Gayatri Mantra has been taken from the Rigveda. So it's been into existence since like 3000 years now. So imagine how many people have heard the Gayatri Mantra now. Well, you'd be surprised to know that the Gayatri Mantra comes to us from the Rigveda. So just imagine how many people have heard the Gayatri Mantra. So what is Rigveda exactly? So Rigveda, let's see what does it mean. Well, firstly, it is in praise of knowledge. That is what it means. And it is the oldest Veda. Since it came down during the early Vedic period, it is the oldest of the 4 Vedas. And not only that, it is also one of the oldest religious texts in the entire world. So that really makes it special. So what is inside the Rigveda? Well, it contains a number of hymns or prayer songs to be offered to gods and goddesses. So because of this Rigveda, we get to know that gods such as Agni and Indra were being worshipped during the early Vedic period. Not only that, we get to learn a lot of things about the early Vedic period because of the Rigveda, as they act as source. Next in line, we get the Samaveda, which comes from the term saman, meaning songs or chants. So we can understand from this that it consisted of songs and verses which were sung by the priest during prayer services. With this, we can also understand the fact that like today we all love music, even back in that day and age, people enjoyed music. So apart from that, the Samaveda is the shortest among the Vedas. And lastly, it is a book of holy songs to be offered to the divine. But that's not it. The thing is that Samaveda took many things from the Rigveda, took many stories from the Rigveda and turned them into songs, right? So as you can see in many movies, there are many songs that are trying to tell you a story, right? So similarly, it has taken stories from the Rigveda and turned them into songs, prayers and chants. Next, we have the Yajurveda. Well, firstly, it is derived from the term Yajurs, which means worship. So basically, they tell us how to worship. So what is inside of it? Well, it provides the procedures of carrying out rituals and explains the reasons behind conducting them. During the later Vedic age, what had happened is that even common people were involved in complex rituals and traditions, right? To correctly perform them, the Yajurveda was there to guide them, right? So these were then broadly grouped into 2 parts. One is Krishna or Black Yajurveda, which basically means unclear or unarranged. Right. And the other part was Shukla or white, which meant clean and arranged verses, basically. So we get to understand that the Yajurveda was divided into 2 parts. One was the Krishna or black, which was unarranged and unclean verses, whereas the other part was Shukla or white, which were clean and arranged properly. These were arranged properly. That is why they were termed as Shukla. From the Yajurveda, we get to see this tradition or ritual, which involves a king and his white horse. So the king leaves his white horse to randomly wander around enemy territories, right? So if the horse wanders around and the enemy king lets him wander, then that land becomes the king's. But if he is stopped, after which both of the kings will get into a fight. And the sacrifice of the horse marks the end of the ritual. So from the Yajurveda, we get to learn about this ritual, which is called the Ashwamedha Yajna, and we get to see how the kings were performing such complex and elaborate rituals in that time. Next we have the Atharva Veda, right, which is derived from the term Atharvanas, or procedures of daily life, because this had many cures to problems and cures to certain diseases and even social problems, right? So it was helpful to people because it suggested cures to diseases, solutions to social problems, and so on. So now that we have heard about all the 4 Vedas, we can understand that they were really unique and different from each other, right? So as a moral, we should all understand this and try to take knowledge from all different subjects, because these will help us out in our daily lives as well. So now let's learn about the story of Bharadwaja, who had lived 3 lives learning about the Vedas. You can look at him getting old. So at the end of his 3rd life, Lord Indra visited him and asked, "What will you do if you were given a 4th life?" To that, he replies that he will still learn about the Vedas. To which Lord Indra pointed towards 3 mountains and broke off fistfuls from each. So then Lord Indra showed that the knowledge that he, Bharadwaja, had acquired was equal to these fistful of the mountains which represented the Vedas, right? So after this, Lord Indra asked if he would like to join him to learn the universal sciences so that he can understand life better. Therefore, whatever we know about the Vedas is minimal, and there is much more to be known about them. So now, are the Vedas the only thing which come under Vedic literature? Well, not exactly. Under Shruti literature, there is another part, which are the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads, about which we will now learn. The story about Bharadwaja that you just heard was taken from the Brahmanas. So let us see what exactly they were. Well, firstly, they explain the procedures of sacrifices and rituals which are there in the Vedas, right? And also state the purpose, the reason of conducting such religious activities. So these were basically explaining why the rituals were being conducted, and also the procedures of conducting these rituals. However, most of the Brahmanas have been lost or destroyed. Today, less than 20 Brahmanas have survived, right? Most have been lost or destroyed, because you can understand that they come from such a long time back, right? So we know now that most have been lost or destroyed and only 20 are currently present. After this, we have the Upanishads. If you remember correctly, then during the later Vedic age, what had happened is that a lot of people, in fact, most of the people were involved in conducting expensive, lavish, complex rituals, right? So what happened next? Well, the people were really bored of these rituals. So the Upanishads, these came as a rescue for these people, because they emphasized the need for understanding true relationship between Atma or self and Brahma or God, the divine, right? So basically it said not to focus so much on the ritual part of religion, but instead focus on how you are and who you are, right? So focus on Atma or self and Brahma or God, how you are with God, instead of focusing on these rituals. These were also known as Vedanta because they came at the end of the Vedas, right? And there are more than 200 Upanishads present today. So they were philosophical in nature and they criticized the ritualistic part of religion. Instead, they had the people focus on Atma or self and Brahma, the God. After this, we have the Aranyakas, which comes from the word Aranya, which means forest. So, why is it named so? Well, because these were supposed to be read in forests. Basically, these were rites and rituals to be conducted by people who had given up worldly life for God and had retired to the forests. These basically are given at the end of the Vedas and explain the meaning of rituals and their relevance to people performing them. So basically, these were only for the people living hermit lives, right? So today, our historians cannot figure out when these texts were exactly written down. Why was it so? Well, because paper did not exist back then, right? So they could not write down. And even though they could write, they used to write on palm leaves and animal skins, which you can even see. This is a palm leaves manuscript and this is an animal skin one. And you can take a look at them, how different they are from paper. So what happens with these things? Well, these things can decompose very easily and get lost very easily, right? So because of that, they were easily decomposed and they got lost over time. This is why we don't have a lot of, but the earliest surviving Veda or the earliest surviving evidence of a Veda, which we have today, was written down in the 11th century CE, right? So we can understand how old this was truly. So you'd be really fascinated to know that because the Vedas were first orally transmitted from one generation to the next, it might have suffered various changes, right? So today we might be reading something completely different than when it was first composed. So lastly, let us try to understand what composed the Shruti literature. Firstly, there were the 4 Vedas, Rigveda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and finally Atharva Veda. Manuscripts of which are available here. They look really similar, but they are in fact very different and unique, right? Apart from that, there were also the books that were explaining these Vedas, which included the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads, which were also different from each other. So, because of this, we can understand how unique all of this was and how it must be read. Lastly, because these Vedas were so unique and different, we get to know that the Vedas were known by other names as well in different parts of India, such as Marai and Vaimoli in parts of South India, which literally meant texts of mystery and secrets, because a lot of the Vedas hasn't been figured out yet. So with that, we can understand that we are still trying to learn about the Vedas. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free on DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app and get easy access to more than 5,000 amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million+ questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and get a chance to win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.